Hey, friends, we're back. It's another episode of Syracuse Sports. My name is Brent X. It is awesome to have you here, however you arrived here. If you're more of a visual learner and you love the YouTube, we're on YouTube, baby. Listen, I sound so old. Are you on the YouTube? We're on YouTube, of course. Find us there, Syracuse Orange Sports. Subscribe. And when new episodes pop up, you will be the first to know about it, or on the traditional audio services as well, if you prefer the theater of the mind experience on Spotify, Apple, but wherever you get your podcasts, you will find Syracuse Sports. So please subscribe, follow, so you don't miss a darn thing, and you can listen on demand when you want. Chris Carlson and I made a valiant attempt, I think, to answer your questions about the House settlement. What's going on with this thing? And how does it affect Syracuse sports? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it status quo? How does it affect NIL? What's going on with these roster limits now? There's a lot of questions that have spanned from this House settlement. And Chris and I dove into some of the details and some things that maybe you knew, maybe some things that you didn't. And maybe we'll create more questions than we answer, which is fine, because we'll be happy to answer those questions as we go. That's just the thing. Nobody has all the answers to this, right? So $20.5 million comes in from the settlement of the lawsuit. $20.5 million that schools have the option to pay out. They are not obligated to pay out. Syracuse has opted in, meaning they can directly pay their athletes. If there's one thing you take away from this more than anything, and Chris and I will get into all the details coming up, it is that schools, for the first time in history, can now directly pay their athletes. How they do that, how much money gets distributed to each sport, and how NIL factors into that. Remember, NIL is still in a separate bucket than the $20.5 million that comes from the House settlement. So we'll try to answer all those questions for you here as the line gets even more blurry about whether this is professional sports, semi-professional sports, amateur athletics. Is this still college sports? That changes by the day. But the parameters have been put into place. I'm as fascinated as anybody to see how it goes going forward. So Chris and I are going to try and tell you everything you need to know about the House settlement and how it affects Syracuse athletics, at least to what we know here in the middle of June. So we'll get to that coming up here shortly. But as you know, but in case you don't, we love to feature your original music here on Syracuse Sports. And we've got an artist today. And I have to admit, I'm not the biggest country music fan in the world. I have nothing against country. I've just never been my thing. But man, country sounds today, there's a lot of pop influence. There's certainly a lot of rock influence in country, and there's some great country tunes out there. So I heard this song from Reed Kirkwood. He's from Marcellus, New York, right outside of Syracuse. He now lives in Boston, and this is how his music is described: brewed in upstate New York, bottled in Nashville, and drunk in New England. I love that. A multi-instrumentalist and producer, rock and pop blending into his own brand of country. And I think you're going to hear that in this tune coming up here. It's called If You Love Someone. So we're going to play a little bit of that tune here. Then we're going to hear from Chris Carlson. And then what we'll do is we'll play If You Love Someone in its entirety at the end of the podcast. We're going to do that for Reed Kirkwood today. And all the info on where you can find his music is in the show notes. We could do it for you as well. Do you have original music that you want to share with us that we could play here on Syracuse Sports? Are you in a band and trying to get your name out there, trying to get people to hear your tunes? We certainly have a lot of Syracuse connections here, but you don't have to be a local band or have a Syracuse connection to get your music featured here on Syracuse Sports. Get in touch. All the info is in the show notes on how you can get your original music featured here on Syracuse Sports. So before we hear from Chris, let's hear from Reed Kirkwood, If You Love Someone.
I thought she'd want to settle down. No diamond ring could ever keep her in this little town. And nothing on the aftertaste of her talents chasing dreams down the interstate. I would have followed that girl anywhere, but I never told her, and the nights are getting colder ever since we came undone. Just like a wild horse, I let her run. 'Cause if you love someone and you let them go, those taillights fade out down the road. And now you're sitting there just drinking Jack.
All right, Chris, we are going to wade into some uncharted waters here for a bit. The House settlement has come through. We've heard about this for months. I think people have a basic understanding of what's going on. We're still trying to figure out what's going on. I think everybody involved is trying to figure out what's going on. But there are some things we know. There are some parameters out there. So what Chris and I wanted to do was try and sort through this and come to the conclusion and try and answer the question as best as we can. How does this affect Syracuse? Right? This is everything we hope to find out and to know about how the House settlement is going to affect Syracuse, and hopefully answer some of your questions. We've got some specific questions and some good ones from our Syracuse Sports Insiders that we will answer. But Chris, you have been tracking this. It comes down on a Friday night. Nice Friday night news dump, about 9:30 Friday night. Judge Wilkin, who also ruled on the famous Ed O'Bannon case and a couple other college sports cases, puts out her ruling. When that all came down, was it what you were expecting? Were there any surprises in there, or what was your big takeaway once everybody ran to the computer to read what was going on a Friday night?
I mean, I think it's pretty much what everybody has expected and talked about for a while. I mean, the only, I guess, debate in my mind was, the roster limits. She seemed very concerned about the roster limits and the idea that she would be forcing some athletes out of sports for a period of time. And if that would keep her from, approving the settlement. So, that was the one sort of maybe bit of drama that got put into it. But the fact that she approved it, I don't think anybody was really too surprised that happened.
The roster limit is something we will get into. The magic number there is 105
for football.
And for football,
there are roster limits in every sport now.
There are roster limits in every sport, and you can kind of chart that and find what sport. Some of them are interesting, how many roster spots are for certain sports. Maybe you don't need that number, but that's a whole different podcast for a different day. But for football, it's 105. And the big thing there, Chris, while we're on that subject, is are we looking at the death of the walk-on, basically?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly reduces it, right? Like nobody, like the schools that have 140, the Nebraskas, the Clemsons, where you get a whole slew of walk-ons. I mean, you don't have roster room for those athletes anymore. I do think that schools, I don't think you need 105 scholarship guys either, right? And so to me, I still think that there will be some walk-ons. There will be a smaller number. Maybe you take 10 guys, you take your preferred walk-on guys, and you keep those as preferred as walk-ons, because right, schools are going to be permitted to pay athletes $20.5 million, but the first $2.5 million in new scholarships that comes out of your $20.5 million.
Right.
So if Syracuse adds, 20 new scholarships for football, that's $1.6 million that the school then can't pay athletes directly. And I would rather have $1.6 million for my quarterback.
Yes.
Than the 20 for my starting quarterback than scholarships for the 20 final players on my roster. Now, there might be reasons why Syracuse doesn't do that. Scholarships are easier to endow. You might get more, donor support for giving kids scholarships than direct money. But if the question is that, I'll take the money from my best players versus like the last 20 guys on my roster, and we'll use preferred walk-ons for that.
Fran Brown was asked about this the other day, and here's what he said, quote, "We're not at the full 105 now. I'm kind of clever with a lot of the things that I do. I know how to reach us up to get us a little bit more. When the time is right, we'll talk about that, but we're going to be straight." So Fran not committing to the full 105, but we'll be okay. And I appreciate his answer about how creative you can be. And I think it's what you were just kind of referring to there, Chris. I don't have to go to 105, but if I need to, I will, and we'll be creative with it. So the roster limit.
And Fran will have an idea of how many guys he wants to look at, right? Like
for sure.
Like,
yeah.
does he want to look at 20 extra guys a year, 10 an extra year? What's the right number for him? He'll know.
I think you hit it on the head, though. Why spend all that money for 105 roster spots if you don't need them? If I can have 5 or 6 walk-ons, take that money and give it to the starting quarterback or give it to a Trevor Pena to retain him or whatever the case may be, right? All right. So let's go through the basics here. This is House Settlement 101, if you will. So just a little bit of story time with Uncle Brent here on what went down Friday and what has been building up to this. The biggest takeaway that anybody can come away from the House settlement is this. Schools can now directly pay athletes. That, of course, has been something that has not been able to happen since the NCAA came into existence in the early 1900s. That has been the dividing line between professional and amateur athletics, Chris, which makes me ask a question that our friends at cleveland.com asked on their terrific Ohio State podcast. And I'll ask you, do we still cover college sports? Right? I think it kind of feels like we don't anymore.
The athletes still go to classes.
They do. It is still a university. It's still on a campus, and all the
bagman and the bagman has always existed. So the idea that the idea that athletes haven't been paid was always a figment of our imagination, if we chose to believe it.
That's correct.
So I say yes. I say they're still going to classes. It's still college sports.
Let me go through a little bit of the details. The House versus NCAA settlement ends 3 separate federal antitrust lawsuits, all of which claim that the NCAA was illegally limiting the earning power of college athletes. The NCAA will pay back nearly $2.8 billion in back damages over the next 10 years to athletes who competed in college at any time from 2016 to present day. Now, why did they select that date? Here's why. The 2016-17 season serves as the cutoff because it's 4 years prior to the NCAA allowing NIL compensation, aligning with the statute of limitations for claims under the Sherman Antitrust Act, right? So why did they pick that date? That's why. And that's a lot of money they got to pay back, so they're going to draw the line wherever they can in that case. Okay. Moving forward, each school can pay its athletes up to a certain limit. The annual cap is expected to start at roughly $20.5 million per school starting this upcoming year, 2025-26, and will increase every year during that decade-long deal. These new payments are in addition to scholarships and other benefits that athletes already receive. It is also in addition to third-party NIL payments. So if there's a point we can make here, Chris, Syracuse now has $20.5 million that it can spend. They are not obligated to pay all this money. You can opt in for as much or as little as you want. John Weilhack said back in February, and has reiterated a couple times since, that Syracuse is all in. They're going to pay out the full $20.5 million. Now, this is for all sports. The percentages of how this will go, certainly football is going to get a big chunk of this, right? But the percentage model that's out there, if you look at it from a Syracuse standpoint, football, and these are rough numbers, will get about 12, 13 million, 4.5 to 5 million to men's basketball, 1 to 1.5 million to women's basketball, and then take all that money that's left over and distribute it to the Olympic sports, right? Syracuse says they're all in, Chris, 20.5 million. So you break down the percentages there. But there are other schools that may not pay all of that, that may not have football, that will pay some of it. Think of some of the basketball schools out there, for example, that don't have football and can allocate more of that money to basketball or other sports. But
if they have
that's the biggest, if they have it, that's the big question, right? That's the biggest thing you could take away from this. Syracuse now can directly pay its athletes. $20.5 million is the cap, and that's going to go up going forward here. And Chris, this will become a yearly question that we'll be asking. Are you paying the full $20.5 million or whatever the number is going forward, right? For now, Syracuse says they're in, but we'll see if that continues to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Syracuse's athletic budget from the most recent year that it's available through the federal government, and they spent, $111 million on, sports. So like $20 million is a big chunk of that budget, and it's only going to the chunk is probably only going to grow bigger over time because the money is tied to what the Power Four conferences make. the SEC and the Big Ten are growing faster than the ACC. So, Syracuse is going to have to sort of put more and more of its resources into paying athletes if it wants to be, maxed out. And if you're not maxed out, it's hard to make the argument that you're really trying to win, right? Like when you say you're competing for national championships, if you're not putting every dollar that you can into it, like you're not really like trying to compete for national championships, which is why you're hearing conversations about private equity getting involved, schools having to look outside to raise the money, because they all know that if we're not at the max, like our fans, like they're not going to buy that line that we're competing for national championships anymore, because we won't be. And that is right. We both know that is just the school money. So collectives aren't going away. Schools aren't going to, schools are still going to be pushing local businesses to cut deals with athletes. That is here to stay.
That $20.5 million comes from this figure, by the way. Participating colleges will directly pay athletes a share of up to 22% of the average power conference athletic media, ticket, and sponsorship revenue. So $20.5 million came out of that number, right? Those payments will be in addition to both athletic scholarships, which cover tuition, housing, health resources, and other benefits, and NIL deals that athletes sign with third parties. Okay. So we have that $20.5 million, however it's distributed. NIL is still, at least in theory, Chris, right? It's in a separate bucket. So that's one I think is one of the bigger lines of confusion from people. The $20.5 million is revenue sharing directly from the schools that they're going to pay athletes, however they choose to distribute that.
Yep.
But you can still make NIL money. So just this week, for example, SU football NIL has a fundraising event, a golf tournament at Bellevue Country Club here in Syracuse, on the west side of Syracuse. And people could pay it was $3,000 a foursome. There was a silent auction. I wrote a story about this, which people can check out on syracuse.com, where John Lally, of course, Syracuse's biggest booster of the Lally Athletic Complex, and a name you certainly know, John and his wife, Laura, matched $1 million that was raised just at this dinner, right? A few other sponsors, Colby Clark included, a local businessman, and a few other people. So there's $2 million raised in 10 minutes. But that's going to SU football NIL, which is a separate bucket. The NIL, third-party NIL money is over here. So I think people would say, well, can you pay, let's just use a player, for example, can you pay Ricky Collins Jr. revenue sharing money in NIL? The answer is yes. He can seek those NIL deals in addition to whatever money he would be paid by Syracuse. It's going to be fascinating to see, Chris, how NIL goes going forward here, because now what's going to happen is NIL deals with third parties that exceed $600 face independent review. The review will ensure those deals are not substantially pay-for-play agreements, which remain prohibited by NCAA rules. There is a company called Deloitte that is going to be the clearinghouse that will attempt to monitor these deals and determine what is fair market value and determine that these are not pay-for-play deals. Now, let's stop right here for a minute, because I am fascinated how this is going to go down. You have one company, one entity that is reviewing all the deals. So in theory, you do an NIL deal, you have to submit it to Deloitte, and they basically have to give you the thumbs up or not if it's allowed. Chris, to put a expression that's been out there in a lot of walks of life and will certainly apply here, I think, there will be lawsuits on this. Yeah. I'm just waiting for the first deal that gets denied and boom, lawsuit, right?
Yep. I mean, so I was talking with Dave Maloney of Syracuse's Falk College the other day, and he mentioned that for a professional athlete, $1 million is a big endorsement deal. Like that is a big endorsement deal. And I was talking with Jim Cavalli, former Christian Brothers Academy graduate, now works for athletes.org, which is trying to bring collective bargaining to sports. And he has an NFL player that he works with who said when he was in the NFL, 5 to 6 NFL athletes got endorsement deals. So if that's the NFL level and those endorsement deals are only worth $1 million and that's the landscape, how many of these NIL deals, big money NIL deals that we've been talking about, how many of those are going to pass muster? They shouldn't,
Yes.
right? They shouldn't if the Deloitte organization is doing what they say they're going to do. But if I'm the Texas Tech softball pitcher and I know Texas Tech is paying me $1 million this year and I'm the next pitcher, that deal is going to get rejected. The school is not going to pay her $1 million because all of the school's money is going to go to football and basketball. She's not going to come close to $1 million. And if I am the next great softball pitcher, I am suing immediately.
That's a great point.
And I think I'm winning.
And I think you're winning as well. So the first case that comes out of that is going to be fascinating to track. And what is fair market value, right? If Texas wants to pay their third string quarterback $5 million a year, I'm just throwing numbers out here. Should they be allowed to, right? It's a fair market.
Traditionally, fair market value is what you can get.
It's America, baby. You can get what you can get. So what Deloitte determines is fair market value. And here's another thing to throw in there. There'll be a test later, so pay attention, everybody. The NCAA is getting out of the enforcement business. So everybody thinks about the big bad NCAA here, Chris. There's a new entity in this whole thing. It's called the College Sports Commission. The commissioners of the big four leagues, the ACC, the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Big 12, we're all in on this guy. Former MLB executive Brian Seeley was named the CEO of this new enforcement organization. It's called the College Sports Commission. And as it says here, his job will be to lead the team responsible for enforcement of the new rules around revenue sharing, third-party payments to players for NIL deals, and the roster limits that we brought up earlier. One of the biggest questions on that, though, is what happens when those rules are broken? And how do you find out about it? Is Brian Seeley's organization going to run into the same roadblocks that the NCAA did? Which, at the end of the day, Chris, as much as the NCAA had this reputation for a long time, they just didn't have enough people to track all this stuff. And
or
I think
subpoena power.
Or subpoena power, or true authority.
It is still voluntary.
Yes.
Athletes are supposed to report every NIL deal. But if you have an NIL, why should you?
Why should you? Think about it. Why should I even report it? Are they going to, what's the punishment going to be?
If you're that Texas Tech softball pitcher, why would you report it? And then if you don't report it, how does this organization ever find out that it exists?
Yeah. Do they have, and that is something we're going to find out in real time. And here's, by the way, what a couple of commissioners said about this. Brett Yormark, he's the commissioner of the Big 12, quote, "Our schools want rules and we are providing rules, and we will be governed by those rules. If you break those rules, the ramifications will be punitive." Okay. But from who? You? The College Sports Commission? Right? We're still trying to figure that out. Jim Phillips, the commissioner of the ACC, said, quote, "It isn't going to be," you know what? Let me pop these on the screen while we're talking about them here. Here's Jim Phillips. "It isn't going to be perfect, but we're committed to progress, learning, adapting, strengthening the model to support and protect college sports." I mean, Chris, what we're doing here is we're trying to put the genie back in the bottle. They're trying to back litigate this in some way, and everybody's trying to figure out, well, what kind of authority, and like you said, subpoena power and everything else, does this new College Sports Commission have? I guess we're going to find out in real time how this goes.
When I was talking to Cavalli this morning, I thought this was a really interesting thought. Much of college sports thinks that in 5 to 10 years, we're going to have this great cut down, right? The Super League's going to happen. Now, whether it's 36 teams, whether it's 72 teams, we don't know. But the Super League, the next round of realignment, let's say that, is coming in 5 to 10 years. The school's on the edge of that. This is the most important time in their athletic department's history. They are going to either make it or they are not going to make it. You have just spent 2 years telling everybody that gives your athlete that they are doing their civic duty and they are a hero and they are the reason the athletic program is thriving. So you think that in the most important span in your athletic department's history, those people are just going to follow the rules and stop paying athletes the money you don't want to pay them. It's just not going to happen. It's not.
So those are a lot of the big details here, right? So we wanted to give you that backdrop, the big takeaways generally. So now let's hone it in on the big question. Is Syracuse at an advantage or disadvantage in any meaningful way based on the terms of this settlement? What is really going to change now that this has happened? Syracuse has opted all in for the upcoming year, the $20.5 million. NIL is still a thing where you're ever evolving, raising money, trying to, compete with the big boys there. But is this really going to change anything? Is Syracuse put at an advantage or a disadvantage? Or is it just status quo, Chris, I guess is the question. I'm going to say that Syracuse has a slight advantage here. I think it's better that they can be in a position where they can pay out a little more money from the school, albeit with a cap, and be in that game while trying to raise money NIL-wise to supplement that, as opposed to not. And the fact that they committed, and Syracuse is not pulling a Syracuse here and being like, well, we can't tell you how much, and there's going to be details we're not privy to because Syracuse is a private school and there's certain things that they can use to their advantage there. But
they did only commit for the first year. Like that is something we are going to ask every single year.
That's where I'm not. I've got 1 foot over the finish line and 1 behind it. I want to see what happens after this year. I think
they'll be all in for the reasons we said. Like they have to be.
Yes. But if they find out that we went all in on this thing and we still can't run with the big dogs, then why are we doing this? Right? That's a possibility in the future. So on that question, Chris, what do you think? Advantage, disadvantage, status quo? Something I'm not thinking of?
I think it's largely status quo because I don't think the rules are going to be like enforceable at all in terms of like the Deloitte. So I think it's still just a matter of like raise as much as you can, give athletes as much as you can the way it is now. If the rules are actually enforced, I think the leveling of the playing field is really good for Syracuse. Like we don't have a Texas oil Baron here in
no
Syracuse.
Phil Knight here in Syracuse. Yeah.
Right. So, theoretically, Deloitte is supposed to take those people sort of out of the equation to a degree. I don't think that'll work, but if it does, it's good for Syracuse. The one interesting disadvantage that I'll be curious how it works is the idea that, right, Syracuse is going to be trying to support a basketball and a football program with its money. There are some schools that are only going to be supporting a basketball program or our UConn, where it's like they're going to give their football program just enough to not be an embarrassment, but they're really going to put the money into basketball. Now, those schools don't bring in as much revenue, so they might not have as much money to give back to athletes. We don't quite know how that's going to work, but they are at least allowed to give a lot more to their basketball players than Syracuse is going to have to give to its basketball players.
Let me throw you another example.
I am curious how that works.
St. John's doesn't have football, but St. John's is riding high right now, and Rick Pitino has gone to they have a big money vitamin water guy, I forget his name off the top of my head. That's
Mike Rapole. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but
thank you. Now that's NIL. That's not what we're talking about here. What St. John's is able to do in terms of the revenue share money, the $20.5 million that they can distribute, a little tougher to do because they don't have football, but they are still at an advantage over, if you think of Syracuse, which is trying to revitalize itself, of course, and is trying to do it in both ways, basketball wise. Well, there's still some limits there. If you're Syracuse, you have to keep football going, but also you're trying to get a basketball program, which you're still probably known for the best, back in the NCAA tournament for the first time in 4 years.
Rapole is also probably going to, right, the way that he paid St. John's athletes now, he was probably paying taxes on that. He was probably doing it through NIL, probably doing the legitimate way. He can probably make a tax-deductible donation to the university, which can then distribute it through the institutional funds. So Rapole probably gets a little bit of a tax break from the new arrangement. And that's my guess as to how he's going to do it. Now, how much is he going to give each year? Where is St. John's number going to be, right? It might not be at that 20.5 million because they don't have the football revenue coming in. But, whether those basketball schools like St. John's do sort of pull away from schools like Syracuse will be, that is where I see a potential disadvantage. I don't know how it's going to work, but.
Chris, we had some great questions from our Syracuse Sports Insiders, and we would love for you to join the party, my friends, and be a Syracuse Sports Insider, which means you get direct text message access to me anytime. Your questions about stories like this that come up. How does it affect Syracuse? What's going on? The things that you want Chris and I to ask John Wildhack and Syracuse coaches and administrators about stories like this or anything going on in Syracuse sports. The latest news, info, opinion, analysis. Just want to shoot the breeze, talk SU sports, become a Syracuse Sports Insider today. And our podcast here exclusively highlights questions from our Syracuse Sports Insiders. We don't take questions or comments from social media, the mail. If you run into me at Wegmans and ask a question, be like, yeah, sorry, you got to be an insider, right? Maybe I won't do that. Maybe I'll answer your question at Wegmans. But we would love for you to be a Syracuse Sports Insider one way or the other. It's just $3.99 a month, but you could try it free for 2 weeks, and the info is there on your screen and in the show notes on how you can sign up. Mark T asked this question, Chris. We always hear now that each school has $20 million to spend. They have discretion by sport. But if that's the total, why do I always hear that SEC or Big Ten schools have much more money to spend than Syracuse if they all have the same spending cap? So I think that goes back to what we were saying about $20.5 million in this bucket, but NIL is still in another bucket, and those SEC Big Ten schools are still raking in the dough in that category.
Plus, this is the first year with the cap. So, before now, the cap is irrelevant. Nobody's had $20.5 million to spend. And I would also say that a lot of schools, knowing this Deloitte thing was coming, some of the boosters did pour a lot of money in this year, front loading their contracts, getting the money to their athletes before Deloitte would had any oversight over the contracts. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the salaries for this year, a lot of the payrolls are extremely high for that reason. Everybody was eager to get their money in before there was any oversight over any of the contracts.
Jim L has this question. We briefly touched on it a moment ago. My question is, what do basketball-only schools have to look forward to? Schools like St. John's, Georgetown, and even Lemoyne. Are they able to spend $20 million on basketball and other sports?
They can if they have it.
That's the question. Those basketball-only schools don't have the football revenue. So if you got it, yeah, baby, you can spend as much as you want of that 20.5 on basketball, but it's tough to get there when you don't have football, right? Mike V. So if any NIL deals outside of $20.5 million have to be approved by a clearinghouse, won't there literally be thousands? How is NCAA going to prioritize these requests, and are they actually going to turn any down? They'll end up in court in 2 seconds. Now, Mike's right about that. We're going to see plenty of lawsuits. But remember, as we went over, the NCAA is not enforcing this. It's the College Sports Commission. It's a whole new thing that's going to try and dive in here and enforce this. So, Mike, I'm as fascinated as anybody how they're going to do it, what the motivation will be for people to report these things. And once it goes down, there will be lawsuits. Chris, once again, reminding me why, as much as I enjoy doing this, I should have been a lawyer.
Yeah.
Sorry,
mistake.
Mom.
Big mistake. We can all blame Deloitte, though, in the future. We can stop blaming the NCAA for everything, and we can start blaming Deloitte.
Deloitte is an interesting company. I have a little experience with them, Chris, and I vote for the Heisman Trophy, and I have to, everybody has to do like that authenticator app now, that 2-factor authentication. And in order to vote for the Heisman, Deloitte has to approve me. I have to go through their little system, and
you made it through. You didn't.
And I made it. So if they let me vote for the Heisman, I think your NIL deals.
It doesn't say much for their standards if they're letting you through those. So
that tells you right there what Deloitte's all about, right? A couple more great questions here from our insiders. From Frank, who says, how do each of you see the settlement impacting transfer portal moves by players, teams, and recruiting strategy? Good question there.
I don't think it will have a huge impact personally. Like, I think it's going to be sort of the same as it is now. I will be curious. I saw Jay Billis had some comments earlier today where he said he expected multi-year contracts and for those to keep athletes in place longer.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was talking to Jim Cavalli, he mentioned like the athletes are not signing contracts with schools for participation in sports. They're signing NIL contracts. They're signing over their NIL rights. So one should have nothing to do with the other.
Mm-hmm.
The athlete we all know in reality, they are being paid to play quarterback at Syracuse University, but legally they are being paid for their NIL rights as a Syracuse University athlete. So it will be interesting how enforceable any of the contracts are, how enforceable any of the buyouts are, if there are multi-year contracts. And I don't think we know the answer to that yet.
Just a shout out to Jack, Chris, because you mentioned it. He had that same question about what Jay Billis noted, that he read the settlement allows contracts for NIL and they could include buyout clauses. Jay Billis thinks it'll end the transfer portal as we know it. So we'll see about that. Jay's a pretty smart guy, and he's a lawyer, and he knows how to sort through these things.
He knows. Jim Cavalli's smart too, and
Jim Cavalli's a smart guy,
and he expects holdouts, contract holdouts,
Ooh.
and deals that schools will struggle to enforce because they are lying about what athletes are being paid for.
See, this goes back to what I said towards the top of the podcast, Chris. We don't cover college sports anymore. Yeah. When I'm talking about it, when you and I are reporting on Syracuse football training camp and there's a holdout, guess what? This ain't college sports, baby, right? Yeah. Even though technically we're on a college campus and all that fun stuff. I'm as fascinated as anybody how this is going to go. I hope we answered some of your questions. If we created more questions, please shoot us a text, shoot us an email, let us know. There will be many more discussions about this going forward. All the parameters have been to put in place. Some of the enforcement starts July 1st. Some of it goes into effect essentially right away. There was an extension given, Chris, that just came out as we recorded this today on Wednesday, that schools now have until June 30th to opt in to the $20.5 million if they want to. That deadline prior was June 15th. They now have to the end of the month to decide if they haven't already. And most of the big boys already have, to send that message that you said to the fan base, like, we're in on this, but in case you haven't, you got a little extra time to figure this out. But once July 1st hits, I'm not going to say the full quote because it's a family podcast, but as Doc Brown once said, in Back to the Future, you're going to see some serious bleep. Can't wait to see it all go down.
We'll be here for it.
In the least. And we'll be here for it. We'll be all over it for you, baby, trying to answer those questions as we go. So I hope this was helpful. But if it created a few more questions for you, please reach out on the text line, and Chris and I'm sure we'll revisit this subject as we go down the road here, and it's going to be certainly fascinating to follow. But thank you, Chris. I appreciate your insight, and you've been doing a great job covering this and writing about it for us on syracuse.com, and plenty more to come, to say the least.
Thanks for having me, Brent.
Well, I hope we answered some of your questions anyway. Maybe we created more, but Chris and I will certainly be tracking this and how it all affects Syracuse sports. We're all just waiting for the implementation of this. Who is the first NIL deal that will be made an example of? Will there be more lawsuits? Of course, there will be more lawsuits. And how schools adhere to this through the history of college sports, there's always been, let's say, creative ways that schools get around the rules. And how will they find ways around these? We shall see. Will they adhere to this, and we'll clean up all of the mess that has been created in the minds of some since name, image, and likeness has come into play in just the last 4 or 5 years here on the college sports scene. We'll be all over it, and certainly more to come on this as we go forward. But we hope that helped and it answered some of your questions. And how about those great questions that we got from our Syracuse Sports Insiders? We would love for you to join our growing community of some of the more passionate Syracuse sports fans out there. And being a Syracuse Sports Insider gives you direct text message access to me anytime. You just want to shoot the breeze, talk SU Sports, shoot me a text. Questions, comments, your insight, your analysis, your opinion, what you're seeing, what you're hearing. I got insiders out there finding great stories and links, and I get tips on stories from our insiders. It's a little bit of everything, and it's just a free-flowing conversation, meaning that you text me, I text you. It's not a group text. Some people like group text, some people don't, but being a Syracuse Sports Insider means you get the latest breaking news that I have first. You get inside analysis, opinion, and so much more from not only me, but our syracuse.com team. And anything you want to know about Syracuse sports, you just shoot me a text and we'll be all over it for you. So just $3.99 a month to be a Syracuse Sports Insider. You could try it free for 2 weeks. All the info is there on your screen if you're watching on YouTube or in the show notes, but it's joinsubtext.com/Syracuse Sports. Easy to sign up. Try it free for 2 weeks, and then just $3.99 a month after that. So thanks for your awesome questions today on this pod and always. I had a pod earlier this week, in case you missed it, with Mike Waters. Mike and Donna DeToda of syracuse.com had an exclusive conversation with Syracuse basketball coach Adrian Autry. They had some fascinating stories about this as well, about how Autry reshaped the roster, the style of play he wants to put out there in this upcoming season, Syracuse's NIL status, and much more. Some good, meaty basketball talk here in the middle of June. And you can catch up on all of our recent Syracuse Sports episodes by being a subscriber either on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's go back to my guy, Reed Kirkwood here, who's going to take us out with his song, If You Love Someone. And again, if you want your original music featured here on Syracuse Sports, would love to do it. Get in touch. All the info in the show notes here, and you can have your song featured on this podcast like Reed Kirkwood is going to take us out here with this great tune, If You Love Someone. We'll catch you next time, guys, here on Syracuse Sports.
I thought she'd wanna settle down. No diamond ring could ever keep her in this little town. And nothing on the aftertaste of her talent chasing dreams down the interstate. I would've followed that girl anywhere, but I never told her, and the nights are getting colder ever since we came undone. Just like a wild horse, I let her run. 'Cause if you love someone and you let them go, those taillights fade out down the road. And now you're sitting there just drinking Jack, praying every night she's coming back. 'Cause if you love someone and you let them go, now you know that's why I'm all alone. She can't be just a memory that I'm trying to drown out with a fifth of Tennessee, just so I can fall asleep, while she's probably falling into someone else's sheets. I was living in a fantasy. I thought she'd do her thing and then she'd want a boomerang, but that ain't how the story ends. So let's replay that old cliche again. 'Cause if you love someone and you let them go, those taillights fade out down the road. And now you're sitting there just drinking Jack, praying every night she's coming back. I know that I'm the only one to blame, 'cause now she's just the one that got away. 'Cause if you love someone